Depression, The New Deal by Thomas Kestner. Franklin Delano Roosevelt is the only president in U.S. history to have served 3 terms. His years in office from 1933 to 1945 are seen very differently by different people. For some, he was a brilliant leader who helped save the country in a time of great peril. Others view him as a president who gave the government too much power over American citizens and their businesses. Franklin Roosevelt, 1882 to 1945, was the only son of a wealthy upstate New York family. A distant relative of Theodore Roosevelt, he married the president's niece, Eleanor Roosevelt, in 1905. Trained in the law, he soon made his way into New York Democratic politics, and in 1910 he won the election to state senate. Stock market collapses. In 1928, Roosevelt was elected governor of New York. Soon after the Great Depression followed, the collapse of the stock market in 1929. Millions of people across the country lost their jobs. In New York, Roosevelt introduced a series of measures that provided relief for the unemployed and helped to create new jobs. These steps made Roosevelt widely popular. In 1932, the Democratic Party nominated FDR to run for president. The nation was trapped in the depths of the Depression, and Roosevelt promised a New Deal to help those in need. He easily defeated President Herbert Hoover, who was seeking a second term, and became the 32nd President of the United States. Once in office, Roosevelt quickly took a series of bold and far-reaching steps. His administration introduced many new programs and agencies and provided assistance to the needy and tried to make people's lives more secure. Collectively, these reforms and programs are known as the New Deal. New welfare system. Over the next 8 years, the New Deal created a new federal welfare system. It included unemployment insurance for those who had lost their jobs and Social Security pensions to give the elderly money in retirement. Another part of the New Deal was its massive federal works projects. These were designed to put people back to work. The result included in many new school buildings, post offices, airports, federal housing projects, and dams. One example of the colossal scale of these projects was the Tennessee Valley Authority, an immense project spread over 7 states. Its goal was to modernize the region. The authority built dams to protect lowlands against floods. It brought electricity and running water to thousands of rural households that never had them before. During these years, Roosevelt also introduced higher tax rates for the wealthy, whom he said must pay their fair share. He signed legislation establishing the 40-hour work week. Another new law set a minimum wage or an amount per hour that employers cannot pay less than. Fireside chats. Despite the bitter opposition from some, Roosevelt was an extremely popular president. His frequent radio broadcasts, known as fireside chats, and his many press conferences made him seem less distant than any president before him. In 1936, he won a second term in a landslide of votes. There were areas in which Roosevelt failed to live up to his progressive ideals, however. For example, the New Deal did little to address widespread discrimination against Black Americans. Many of the New Deal programs tolerated racial discrimination that prevented Blacks from getting good jobs. If combating the Depression was the focus of Roosevelt's first 2 terms, foreign affairs took over by the late 1930s. War was brewing in Europe. In response, Congress passed neutrality acts designed to prevent U.S. involvement. Roosevelt was unable to ignore British pleas for assistance, however, especially after the fall of France in June 1940. He used a variety of creative methods to begin sending arms to Britain. In 1940, Roosevelt ran for a 3rd term, campaigning on a promise to keep the United States out of war. After his historic re-election, however, the situation in Europe turned more grim. Roosevelt began providing strong support to British forces by sending massive quantities of arms and equipment. Japan attacks Pearl Harbor. Soon, the United States was no longer able to avoid becoming involved in the war. On December 7, 1941, Japan attacked U.S. ships at Pearl Harbor, Hawaii, and 3 days later, Germany and Italy declared war on the United States. In 1942, Roosevelt learned of Nazi efforts to wipe out the Jewish population in all areas that fell under their control. The president failed to respond to this Holocaust. He refused to let European Jews move to the United States and ignored pleas to have American warplanes bomb the rail lines leading to the death camps. Despite this terrible failing, it cannot be denied that Roosevelt was a great war president. His leadership was key to the eventual Allied victory. What Roosevelt could not do was end the Great Depression, despite all his New Deal programs. Only World War II could do that, with its relentless demand for production, manpower, and constant spending. What the New Deal did accomplish was to greatly expand the social safety net to help those Americans in need. Additionally, it dramatically increased the federal government's control over many aspects of American life.